Transcription of events from January 1st through January 16th, 1974. I first came in contact with Mr. Albert through a telephone call on January 9th. I had just gone to the nursery, and I got a call from Charlie Ward, wanted me to call Mr. Albert in Ardmore. I talked to him on the phone, and his voice was hoarse. He'd been talking a lot, but he was very, very friendly. Sometimes Mr. Albert tends to get a little bit gripey, but this time very, very friendly. I asked me if I would come over to Ardmore and help him out. Of course, I said I would, and I got there shortly before 2 o'clock, called up to his room. He asked me to come up to the room, went up, Mrs. Albert was there, and there was a reporter from UPI. She was asking Mrs. Albert questions, and then the speaker came out later, and he didn't want to spend too much time with the reporter and wanted to get downstairs as quick as he could. So we get to the reception, and I was supposed to take notes and supposed to just be there and to help greet people and to take care of anything that needed to be taken care of, to which the speaker could not give his full attention at that time. I might point out that the weather was extremely bad that day. It was a question of whether we could get there or not. From Ardmore to Duncan. Duncan was the next stop. I thought they were going to Duncan that night, and as weather began to worsen, I recommended that we leave immediately so that we could get there before the roads iced up that night, because I knew the next morning they would be worse, and if the speaker had to travel by car, a very grueling drive that might take 2 or 3 hours, then he would not be in as good a position to give his best to what he was doing as he would if he had driven that night and was able to get a fresh start the next morning. The meeting at Ardmore went very, very well. The people streamed in regularly for all during the 3 hours. However, there seemed to be the same people that always gather at these things. There's something you just can't get away from, is the people that have been with him for 27 years, some of them friendly, some of them fair weather Democrats. Come out to these things and you hardly ever reach anybody new. You rarely get out of the upper middle class of the community. You rarely get above the lawyer politician type. You never get to the grassroots. I don't know how you do it. I think he realized it, but he enjoyed seeing old friends, thought the meeting went very well. Finally, the decision, we got all packed up in the car and everything, and then he called the Highway Patrol once more. Had a lot of trouble getting the Highway Patrol. Called 3 or 4 times. The number had been changed, and he became perturbed, but finally got through. I recommended to him that he not travel till tomorrow, so we did this. In the meantime, I had made the decision that if we were going to go tomorrow with the roads bad, then the Highway Patrol had to drive us. So the next morning I did call the Highway Patrol, made arrangements for a relay system to be set up. That night we went out to dinner with Gerald Mobley of Ardmore and General Iron Mike Massett of Ardmore. We went to their house for a drink. Mr. Albert refused any kind of drink, said he hadn't had a drink for months. And I think that made a good impression on everyone. And then we went out and ate Mexican food. Speaker seemed to enjoy himself pretty well, liked to be among friends, enjoyed the company, food, so on. And very, very slippery trying to get around. This guy, Mobley, driving his Cadillac, and Speaker in good humor, trying to agree with everything. He's got a quality where if he's not up on something, he'll pick something up from the person he's talking to conversation that might be halfway obvious, and he'll disguise it and shoot it back in the term of a question. Okay. The fellow might say, well, I went to the farm today to pick up my cattle, and he'd come back to say, you've been a farmer here for quite a while around here, haven't you? And the guy would say yes, and be surprised, but the speaker picks up very well on conversation, and somebody doesn't know anything about it, and he can pick up one or two things where he can ask an intelligent question and disguise it in a way where the person doesn't know, thinks he has known about him all his life. Occasionally he's wrong, but he knows how to cover up pretty well too. Great politician. There wasn't much eventful in Ardmore that day. The speaker seemed to be in a good mood and be happy with Mrs. Albert and happy with me personally, and I think he enjoyed it. The next morning we got up early. He insisted on paying for my room, my breakfast. I didn't want him to, but he very kind man. The qualities, he's considerate, he's kind, he's compassionate. You really couldn't find a nicer guy anywhere than Carl Albert. I think that's overlooked. A lot of people criticize him for being a nice guy, but when the chips are down, somebody's in need, there couldn't be a kinder person than Carl Albert. The next day we went to Duncan. It took us 3 hours to get 60-something miles from Ardmore, Oklahoma to Duncan, Oklahoma. Patrol car relay broke 2 pairs of chains getting there. The third car didn't have any chains. We made better time in that one than we did in the previous 2. But everyone was very nice in the highway patrol. The speaker was patient, but you could tell he was annoyed. We're having to ride 3 hours in there. He was beginning to wonder if it was all worth it. Didn't talk much on the way over. You can tell when he's in a talkative mood. Sometimes he's in a storytelling mood, and he'll just tell knee-slapping jokes and laugh at them stories. Sometimes he just sits and doesn't say a word and thinks. Sometimes he can be a very private man. But we finally did make it to Duncan all right. Mrs. Albert stayed back in the car. She stayed back in Ardmore with the Massons. We drove over in the car to Duncan. When he got there, there were a lot of people there. Had been waiting for about an hour to see him. He went in to the room where they were, very impressively shook everybody's hand. About half of them he knew, called them by the first name. Incredible how he remembered all these people. And then made a little speech, emphasized the things they wanted to hear. He told about how he wanted to do the right thing for the country, that he was optimistic that the country would survive, regardless of Watergate, regardless of any other problem we might have, because he knew the spirit of the American people would prevail, and that we've overcome greater crisis than we have today, and that we'd do it again. And he was optimistic over the future, although we did have problems that must be dealt with in an immediate fashion. After he made his little speech, the speaker came out to the country club in Duncan and made a very, very good little talk and a question and answer for him after very partisan. Told about how he had known Nixon ever since he came to Congress, and he'd never much agreed with him, and he thought that every public appearance that Nixon made, that his smile, his good humor was a facade, that Nixon would, if he had his way, would completely isolate himself and never perform any of the public functions that the president must perform. And the speaker was very confident in his relation with the president, and said he tried to cooperate with him, but he didn't see how he could continue to cooperate with him very much longer. He sympathized with people on both sides, but the House is going to have to do the facts, that he listens to his constituents on a lot of things, but on the matter of impeachment, he was going to do what was right, he was going to do what the evidence dictated, and he was not going to let anybody influence him. He said, if this is a political deal, if you do it because your people want you to do it, then you're defying the trust of the Constitution and of the people you represent. So this is an individual decision of conscience, not as much a conscience, but of the facts of the matter, and that this was a government of men, the government of laws, not of men. That's the way it was going to be. Left Duncan, quicker trip back to Ardmore. Speaker got in his car and took off pretty quick once he got back to the motel. And Highway Patrol had set up a relay. They were going to catch him as he went by and pick him up, take him all the way to McAllister. Well, he's a sneaky fella. I don't know how he did it, but the first two highway patrolmen never did find him. He either sneaked past them without them seeing him or took an off-road and came up on the main road later, but they were sitting there, and I stopped and said, as he come by, I said, no one by that description. He's come by, and another fellow on down the road, a highway patrolman, said, I'm Joe, introduced myself, Joe Foote, the Speaker's office and everything, and I said, you're supposed to pick up a yellow car as it came by, and he said, yeah, I hadn't found it. And I said, who is it? He asked me who it was in the car. I said, Carl Albert. I said, well, I saw Carl Albert go by about 5 minutes ago. Nobody said it was Carl Albert. And said the description of the car was different than we had. So if you told me it's Carl Albert, I would have picked him up right away. I would have recognized him as he went by. And that's the identification. This man had never met Carl Albert, but that's the identification that people in Oklahoma have, a very close relationship. So that ended that particular trip. The Speaker thought it was very successful. Speaking about his personality, I was out to visit a friend's house, and the guy told me, I just met him, an old farmer, and he said, you know, you must be very lucky to work for Carl Albert. I've heard a lot of people say so many nice things about him, talk about an honest guy, and that he's for the common people. He's for us working people who are just struggling to make a living, and said, we appreciate that there's a guy in Congress like that representing us. I think this is the backbone of Carl Albert's support. I don't think it's the people that come out to see him, to come out and shake your hand at a reception. I think it's the people that think so much of you, that appreciate you for what you've done for them, and will stand by you no matter what. The next major event was a dinner Saturday night in McAllister. The Speaker, I think, was afraid that not very many people would show up. He never knows. He always runs scared. He always runs with a lack of confidence. He was worried about the success of it, I think, but an overflow crowd, the most people they'd ever had in this, what they call the country kitchen in McAllister. It was a real simple place. Had a buffet dinner of barbecued ribs, barbecued beef, beans, peas, green beans, corn, all the trimmings of a good old Western barbecue. It took everybody a long time to get to the line and eat, and then they had entertainment, just the most country entertainment you could ever have. An Indian fellow stood up and sang a parody on Hello Dolly, called Hello Carl. In fact, and then this family got up and sang a song about Carl Albert. It was a ballad, the ballad of the man from Bug Tussle or something like that. Talked about how he came to Congress, a poor boy, and how he always represented the people. Carl keeps on going. We want him to represent us in 1976, 1978, all the way up to 1999. I can't remember the lyrics. There's a recording of it. I wish I had it. I think, but it was touching. Had a girl up there that did some saying that portrayed America the Beautiful with sign language. And then Speaker Gene Stipe was master of ceremonies. Speaker got up there and he gave us Tim Weiner. You think whenever speech he starts out off, he just looks a little groggy and speech is measured, and he's not really with it. But boy, 5 minutes into that speech, he gets wound up, and he said, one of his lines I remember, he said, Carl, he said, Nixon might have stolen an election, but you'll never be able to accuse Carl Albert of trying to steal the presidency. And he said it with such force, such gusto, that it rocked the whole house. He put in a little humor in his speech. He told a little ditty I wish I could reproduce about fleas. It was very apt. He told a joke about the old preacher, the loaves and the fishes. He gave an old down-home's Tim Weiner. That's all I can say about it to be accurate. was appropriate. He hit on daylight savings time, the energy problem, impeachment, inflation, everything that was on the minds of the people. They loved that he insisted on shaking everyone's hands. He walked out the door. It was just a good old country meeting. Every sheriff, every county commissioner was introduced. It was a typical meeting. I wish there had been some press there to cover it. It's the kind of thing that would really made an impression. He closed, of course, with the standard line that the speakership is the people here, that only two speakers have been born west of the Mississippi River. Only 3 more have lived in the Mississippi when they were elected. It takes a special kind of district to get a man to the speakership. It takes a district that will support their congressman year in and year out, in good times and bad, and give him the time that it takes to become a Speaker of the House of Representatives. It usually thanks them from the bottom of his heart for the support that he's received. And gave an optimistic forecast for the Democrats in 1974 and 1976. Good speech. And then he went off to Claremore to see about his picture. But all the time, he's very, very nice to me. I heard he even bragged on me to Charlie Ward, which was, he'll always brag on members of his staff to other people. He'll never tell you to your face, what he thinks, good or bad. Working for Carl Albert, you're on your own. He doesn't supervise you, doesn't stand over you, but he expects things to be done right, and when they're not, he'll call you and ask you what the problem is. But he's a good guy to work for, you know. He lets you have enough rope to hang yourself if you must, but also do a good job. And I think he's one of the best people to work for in the Congress. He got caught a cold in Miami. Carl Albert is very, very conscious of his health and worries about it. When he gets sick in the least little bit, it worries him until he gets over it. Very finicky about his health, finicky about what he eats as far as health. He doesn't want to be around anybody that's sick, doesn't want to pick up the cold, or whatever disease they might have. It's funny. I remember one time the governor's mansion, he came in to make a speech for David Hall. He was going to stay in the governor's mansion. They put him downstairs, very big room, down sort of a recreation room that had a bed in it. It was down in the basement by a window, and it was a little cool in there. And he just, I can't sleep down here. I'll freeze to death and get a cold and everything. I got to be moved. So we went to the governor's wife, and she moved him up to another room. It wasn't quite as nice. Didn't have a private bathroom, but it was at least warm enough for him. He's a funny little man. Very kind person. One thing I forgot to throw in there, when he's an earthy type person too. We were in a highway patrol car. The chains broke between Ardmore and Duncan, the second set of chains, and he jumped out of the car and pulled his pants down and went to the bathroom. Right there in front of the highway patrolman on the side of the road. He didn't even walk off in a ditch or anything. He stood right there, not 2 feet from the patrol car. No one came by, but that just shows the kind of guy he is, homespun. You know, I can't imagine a lot of politicians from the big city doing that. But one time, you know, I've seen him do that a couple of times. And it's just the way he is. After the meeting in Duncan, I remember he came to me and said, "Joe, you got to remember that I can't let these things go too long, these meetings, and you got to hold them just right. They can be effective, but you don't want to say too much, and you don't want to stay too long, because it can hurt you." Seemed to be treating me more as a protege than he had ever done, and he was very proud of himself after that meeting. Thought he had done a good job. Seemed to think the meeting in Ardmore went better than any of them that he had addressed during his 3-day swing of Bryan County, of southeastern Oklahoma.